He was only 14 when he ascended to the throne of the greatest empire on earth, a boy draped in silk covered in gold and crowned by sin. His name was Elagabalus, the emperor who turned Rome into his own temple of lust, blood, and blasphemy. To some he was a god, to others the very embodiment of madness. But one thing is certain, never before and never again would Rome witness such chaos. He didn't just rule an empire, he desecrated it. He married a Vestal virgin, dressed as a woman, and demanded to be called Lady Empress. He built temples not for the gods of Rome, but for his own, the sun god Elagabalus, and forced senators, soldiers, and priests to bow before his obsession. There were banquets where wine flowed like rivers, orgies that lasted for days, and sacrifices offered in the name of pleasure. Some say he killed his lovers in acts of divine passion. Others claim his nights were filled with screams, laughter, and blood. Elagabalus erased every boundary Rome had ever known, between god and man, emperor and courtesan, the sacred and the profane. But who was he really? A misunderstood revolutionary, or a monster drunk on his own desires? Stay with me until the end, because the final revelation about his death and what they did to his body will leave you completely speechless. Before we dive deeper into this forbidden story, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. You know why? Because that simple gesture tells YouTube that you value deep, cinematic, and fearless stories. And it helps the algorithm bring this kind of content to more people who love the raw, unfiltered truth of history. Comment below what shocked you the most so far: the marriages, the sacrifices, or his obsession with gender and divinity. Your opinion helps decide the next stories. And trust me, the ending of this one will stay in your mind long after the video ends. Imagine a boy who was not born to rule, but to be worshipped. A child of only 9, wrapped in golden robes, led every day to the altar as priests chanted sacred hymns in an ancient tongue. That boy was Varius Avitus Bassianus, a name few remember today, but one that history immortalized as Elagabalus, the most controversial and mysterious emperor of Rome. Born in 203 AD in the Syrian city of Emesa, he grew up surrounded by temples, incense, and golden statues, within a family that believed not in politics, but in the power of the gods. His mother, Julia Soaemius, and his grandmother, Julia Maesa, belonged to the powerful Severan dynasty, a lineage marked by ambition and intrigue. But what truly defined the boy's destiny was his connection to the sun god Elagabalus, the supreme deity of Emesa. From a very young age, Bassianus was prepared to be the high priest of this god, not a human leader, but a bridge between heaven and earth. As a child, he already wore garments of gold, carried sacred symbols, and presided over ceremonies that drew great crowds. To the people of Syria, that little priest was the living embodiment of divine light. Meanwhile, the Roman Empire was facing a time of instability. Emperor Macrinus, who had seized power after the assassination of Caracalla, was struggling with discontent among the legions. He was a man of the army, but without noble blood, and the soldiers longed for the old Severan regime. It was then that Julia Maesa, intelligent, cold, and ambitious, saw her chance. Exiled in Emesa after Caracalla's death, she began to spread a dangerous rumor that her grandson Bassianus was in fact the illegitimate son of Caracalla, the slain emperor. This carefully crafted lie reignited loyalty among the Syrian troops. After all, who better to succeed the fallen ruler than a young child of the gods? Julia Maesa's plot was worthy of an epic. She bribed officers, persuaded generals, and used the boy priest's charisma as her political weapon. Imagine the scene: an entire army of battle-hardened men watching a boy dressed as the sun god, raising his hands in blessing. Legend says that during one ceremony, the soldiers themselves fell to their knees, convinced they were in the presence of a divine being. The line between faith and politics dissolved. Within weeks, the Syrian legions rebelled against Macrinus and proclaimed Bassianus emperor. But the most fascinating part is that in Bassianus's eyes, this was not merely power, it was destiny. He truly believed that ruling Rome was the will of the gods. Even at such a young age, he spoke of the sun's light meant to illuminate the world and saw himself as the chosen one to bring about this new era. To him, there was no separation between religion and empire, between altar and throne. His adolescent mind had been shaped not by the discipline of Roman generals, but by the mystical rituals of an Eastern temple. And this explosive blend of faith, vanity, and divinity would mark the beginning of a reign as glorious as it was chaotic. When Macrinus's troops finally faced the rebels, the unthinkable happened. The emperor's army was defeated by men fighting in the name of a 14-year-old boy. Macrinus was captured and killed. Rome, still unaware of what was coming, now had a new emperor, a boy who had never wielded a sword, yet had conquered the throne through faith, myth, and his family's manipulation. From that moment on, the young priest of Emesa ceased to be merely the servant of a god. He became the object of worship himself. And it is here that the story of Elagabalus begins to transform into something even more astonishing. The boy's arrival in Rome was not just a political transition. It was a cultural and spiritual revolution. He would bring with him the cult of the sun god, the symbol of a new faith that would clash violently with the ancient traditions of the empire's capital. The boy who had once been worshipped in Syria would now impose his vision upon the heart of Rome, and the price for it would be paid in blood, lust, and scandal. When Elagabalus entered Rome, he was not received as an emperor, he was received as a vision. A 14-year-old boy dressed in robes of gold and purple, his face painted, his eyes distant, as if he no longer belonged to this world. Ahead of him marched soldiers carrying a black stone, the sacred symbol of the sun god Elagabal, brought directly from Emesa, his birthplace. That object, simple yet mysterious, was more than an idol. To Elagabalus, it represented the very heart of the universe, the point where the divine touched the human. And with that stone, he was about to do something Rome had never witnessed before: replace the gods of tradition with a single foreign god, his own. The procession was long and theatrical. As people watched from their windows, the young emperor walked slowly under the scorching sun, followed by Syrian priests, musicians, and dancers performing exotic rituals. It was as if the East had invaded the heart of the Roman Empire. When he finally reached the Palatine Hill, the seat of emperors, the boy ordered the construction of a new temple, not for Jupiter, the supreme god of Rome, but for Elagabal, the sun god. To the Romans, this was blasphemy. But to Elagabalus, it was only the beginning of a new era. He believed he was fulfilling a divine mission to unite all gods under one, the god he himself represented. The senators, accustomed to cold, rational rulers, were horrified. In Senate meetings, the young emperor demanded that everyone kneel before the black stone, proclaiming that the sun was greater than any Roman deity. His voice echoed through the hall, firm, almost feverish, while his garments shimmered in the firelight. He spoke with the conviction of a prophet. It was impossible to ignore him. Even the most powerful remained silent, afraid to offend the living god who now ruled Rome. While his grandmother Julia Maesa pulled the strings of political power behind the scenes, Elagabalus enchanted and scandalized the city with extravagant ceremonies. He ordered that the ancient temples be decorated with Eastern fabrics and perfumes. The images of Roman gods were covered in gold and flowers, as if the empire itself had become a vast altar. Rituals once solemn and austere turned into sacred festivals. Priests and priestesses danced, sang, and poured wine onto the ground, while animals were sacrificed to the beat of drums. But the true scandal was his presence. Elagabalus did not behave like a ruler. He performed like an artist of the sacred. He spoke of visions, of dreams sent by the sun, and claimed to be the chosen one to restore balance between heaven and earth. His distant gaze and gentle manner confused everyone. Some saw him as a madman, others as a prophet. And there were those who adored him, captivated by his beauty and the aura of mystery that surrounded him. Rome, once guided by logic and military power, was now ruled by a teenager who believed himself to be the living reflection of a god. In the streets, people whispered. Some called him the son of the sun, others the golden monster. The generals despised him, but the women of high society competed for a glimpse of him during the processions, where he walked barefoot on petals, covered in jewels and surrounded by incense. His power did not come from weapons, but from attention. He ruled Rome not through strength, but through fascination. With each new ritual, each new display of extravagance, the boy emperor turned the empire into a living theater, and Rome, which once ruled the world, now applauded a spectacle it could not understand. Over time, shock turned into revolt. The soldiers, simple, superstitious men, grew irritated by the long ceremonies, the constant smell of Eastern perfumes, and the fact that the emperor rarely dealt with military affairs. To them, Rome was losing its essence, its virility, its strength. And the one responsible was that golden-clad boy who spent more time in temples than on battlefields. But Elagabalus seemed unaware, or perhaps simply didn't care. The more criticism he received, the more extravagant he became. He believed only the chosen could understand his divine mission. His closest advisors tried to warn him. They told him that the people were beginning to hate him, that the old gods were being profaned, and that the legions felt humiliated. But he merely smiled. He believed himself above politics, above tradition, above the gods themselves. He said the sun had chosen him to destroy the old world and create a new one. And Rome, powerless, watched in a mixture of fascination and horror. The court filled with rumors. They said the young emperor held secret night rituals, that he offered human sacrifices to the sun god, and that his feasts were marked by excess and unrestrained pleasure. They whispered that no one could tell where the temple ended and the brothel began. The line between faith and lust had dissolved, and the more he provoked Rome, the more isolated he became in his own delirium. Deep down, Elagabalus did not want merely to be emperor. He wanted to be worshipped. He did not seek to rule people, but to possess their hearts. He believed that love and fear were the same form of power, and that is what made him so dangerous. A boy who believed himself a god, guided by a woman who saw the empire as a game. Together, he and his grandmother turned the Senate into a stage and religion into spectacle. As the months passed, Rome realized that the young emperor was not merely extravagant. He was something no one could define. Elagabalus did not see himself as a man, nor as an ordinary ruler. He saw himself as a being between the divine and the human, between the masculine and the feminine. His obsession with beauty, sensuality, and his own body began to dominate every aspect of life in the palace. The Romans, accustomed to austere and warrior-like emperors, were astonished to see the Lord of the world painting his lips with crimson pigment, wearing silk gowns, golden ornaments, and jewels worthy of an Eastern goddess. He not only dressed as a woman, he demanded to be treated as one. He ordered his servants to call him Lady Empress, and claimed that true power was not to conquer but to seduce. In public ceremonies, the spectacle was always the same. Elagabalus appeared veiled in transparent fabrics, perfumed with Syrian essences, moving with the studied grace of a sacred dancer. His gestures, delicate and provocative, unsettled the senators. Some laughed quietly, others turned their eyes away, but no one dared to oppose him. Because despite everything, he was still the emperor, and Rome, which called itself civilized, now knelt before a boy who played with the laws of nature. His power was different. It did not come from swords or legions, but from the courage to be what no one else dared to be. Stories of his eccentricities spread like wildfire. It was said that Elagabalus spent hours before a mirror, surrounded by slaves who brushed his hair and dressed him as he experimented with shades of makeup. He believed beauty was a form of divine power, and perhaps that was why he decided to transform his own body. Ancient chronicles, written by authors like Cassius Dio, claim that he offered fortunes to any physician who could perform a surgery to make him a woman, perhaps the first historical record of an attempt at gender transition. He is said to have declared, "I want nature to reflect what I already am in spirit." To many, it was madness. To him, it was enlightenment. But Elagabalus was not content with appearances. He carried his vision of androgyny to the extreme. He married multiple times, both men and women, turning each union into a sacred ritual. The most scandalous of all was his marriage to Aquilia Severa, a Vestal virgin, priestess consecrated to Vesta, goddess of the sacred fire. By law, no Vestal could marry, much less the emperor. Breaking that vow was considered a direct offense to the gods, punishable by death. Yet Elagabalus saw no sin. He declared that his marriage to Aquilia was the sacred union of the sun and the moon, the union of masculine and feminine, divine and earthly. He said that the universe itself celebrated their love, a symbol of celestial harmony. Rome, however, reacted with horror. The religious elite accused him of desecrating the temples. The senators called him a heretic, and the soldiers, simple men devoted to the old gods, began to feel ashamed to serve an emperor who wore dresses. But Elagabalus did not retreat. The more he was condemned, the more he defied. He attended banquets surrounded by musicians, courtesans and gladiators, and often appeared in public with his face hidden behind veils, only his eyes visible, as if to provoke Rome with the mystery of his own identity. He said the body was only a disguise, and that within him lived something greater, a spirit that united all genders and transcended the laws of men. To some modern historians, Elagabalus may have been the first ruler in history to openly challenge gender norms. To his contemporaries, however, he was a living scandal, an emperor who dared to toy with the most sacred symbols, blending religion, eroticism, and power into a single performance. In the eyes of the people, the palace became an extension of the temple, and the temple a stage for his fantasies. He claimed that pleasure was a form of worship, and that physical love brought humankind closer to the gods. Every gesture was a provocation, an attempt to erase the boundary between the divine and the profane. Rumors multiplied. They spoke of nocturnal feasts, secret rituals, and lovers chosen among gladiators and priests. Elagabalus lived as though life itself were a continuous ritual of desire and devotion. And behind all that audacity lay something tragic. He did not seek mere pleasure, but acceptance. He wanted to be loved, understood, venerated, not as a man nor as a woman, but as something new, a living fusion of both. His reign became increasingly incomprehensible to the people, yet impossible to ignore. The scandal that should have destroyed him only made him more famous. Each act of defiance deepened the fascination. But as he sank further into luxury and visions, Rome fell into silence. The ancient temples emptied, the voices of the Senate grew weak, and the empire began to wonder how much longer it could endure such a spectacle. The boy who had once been a servant of a god had now become the center of the cult, and the entire empire his mirror. Rome had never seen anything like it. Inside the imperial palace, the world seemed to have turned upside down. The throne was no longer a symbol of political power. It had become an altar of pleasure, luxury, and madness. Elagabalus had transformed the heart of the empire into a theater of excess, where every night was a ceremony and every ceremony a spectacle. The walls, covered in gold and Eastern tapestries, reflected the glow of torches and the shimmer of jewels. Sweet perfumes filled the air, mingling with the sounds of music, laughter, and cries. There were no rules, no limits, only desire, curiosity, and a kind of worship that bordered on delirium. It was said that the young emperor's banquets lasted for days. The tables, made of marble and gold, bent under the weight of rare meats, exotic fruits, and cups brimming with wine. Wine, in fact, was never in short supply. It flowed like a river through the hall, and many guests woke on the floor, unsure if what they had experienced had been a dream or reality. Elagabalus loved to surprise. Sometimes he would release birds and panthers in the middle of the feast. To remind men that life and death dine together, he would say with an enigmatic smile. At other times, he made rose petals rain from the ceiling, so thick that some guests suffocated beneath the weight of the flowers. He laughed, called it a sacrifice of beauty, and toasted the dead. Nothing inside his palace was ordinary. Each room seemed to belong to a different world. There were chambers lined with mirrors where the emperor liked to watch the reflections of his own gestures, and rooms draped in purple silk where the air smelled of incense and mystery. The feasts began as religious rituals and ended as orgies. Elagabalus believed that pleasure was a form of divine connection. When the body rejoices, he said, it is the spirit that touches the sun. To many it was pure heresy, to him philosophy. Guests came from all walks of life, senators, artists, gladiators, courtesans, and even priests. All were welcome as long as they left their morality at the door. The emperor chose his lovers at random, making no distinction between man and woman. He liked to watch desire as one watches fire, with fascination and danger. Sometimes he played cruel games. He promised riches to anyone who could arouse him with words, or ordered the guests to swap clothes to confuse identities. No one knew whether they were attending a banquet or a religious experiment. The palace had become a mixture of temple and brothel, and the emperor himself was the high priest of pleasure. Rumor had it that Elagabalus liked to disguise himself, and wander the streets at night dressed as a courtesan to experience the lives of those who lived in the shadows. Some claim to have seen him in cheap taverns, dancing, laughing, tossing coins to musicians. To him, it was no shame, it was curiosity. He wanted to feel everything, live everything. The entire empire was his mirror, and every face a variation of his own desire. Over time, however, the line between celebration and cruelty began to blur. It is said that at one of his banquets, the young emperor ordered food to be served only to the most beautiful guests and left the rest starving, saying, "The gods do not dine beside the ugly." On another occasion, he served dishes made of wax and wood merely to mock his guests, while he and his favorites ate real delicacies. Everything was a game. Everything was power. He loved to test the limits of obedience. For many, the palace was a gilded prison. No one knew what the emperor would do next. Some believed that every banquet could be their last. The musicians played in fear, the courtesans danced with tears in their eyes, and even the generals avoided looking him in the eye. Elagabalus was surrounded by luxury but utterly alone. He had become a prisoner of his own spectacle. The emperor's madness was not only sensual, it was also spiritual. He began performing strange sacrifices in the name of the sun god. Animals were slaughtered on golden altars, and sometimes it was said even prisoners were offered to the gods. All this while wine was poured on the ground and the people outside starved. To Elagabalus, it was purification. Blood feeds the sun, he said, and pleasure keeps it burning. His faith had turned into fanaticism, and his fanaticism into theatre. Little by little, even his allies began to drift away. The senators despised him, the priests called him a demon, and the soldiers, once sworn to his service, now watched him with suspicion. The boy who had once been a symbol of light had become a shadow. Yet Elagabalus seemed not to notice. He kept laughing, dancing and celebrating, as if eternity protected him. He believed that as long as the sun shone, Rome was his. But the sun also sets, and the golden glow of the palace began to darken. The empire murmured, the generals conspired, and even his grandmother, who had once placed him on the throne, began to regret it. The city that once bowed before him now looked upon him with fear and disgust. The spectacle was about to end, and the finale would not be a feast, but a sacrifice. Elagabalus's spectacle was about to come to an end. What had begun as fascination quickly turned into disgust. The empire that had once bowed before the young god now looked upon him with hatred and fear. Rome was exhausted. Exhausted by the endless feasts, the insane rituals, the baths of wine, the nightly screams, and the ceaseless sound of flutes echoing from the palace. Tired of being ruled by a teenager who treated the throne as an altar and power as a game. And above all, tired of watching an ancient empire dissolve into lust, superstition, and blood. The glow of the sun boy was beginning to fade. The first to turn against him were the senators. Behind gilded walls they conspired in silence, fearing that the empire would collapse under the weight of the young emperor's madness. Then came the generals. Men who had marched across half the world with Caracalla and now watched their legions disgraced by a ruler who had never wielded a sword. But the deadliest betrayal came from where he least expected it. The Praetorian Guard itself, the elite soldiers sworn to protect the emperor. For years they had endured his whims, his orgies, his endless banquets. But respect had turned into contempt. To them, Elagabalus was no longer the master of Rome. He was a living disgrace, an insult to the blood and steel that had built the empire. Even within the palace, whispers grew. Slaves, servants, and even priests began to withdraw. The corridors once filled with music fell silent. Flowers wilted on tables still stained with wine. The court, which had once applauded him, now feared him. And his grandmother, Julia Maesa, the very woman who had placed him on the throne, began to see that her creation was out of control. She, who had believed she could rule Rome through him, now feared that the name of the Severan family would be destroyed along with her grandson's reputation. Tensions reached their breaking point. The city murmured. The ancient temples began to close their doors. The gods of Rome seemed to have turned their faces away. Amid the decay, Julia Maesa devised the final plan. In secret, she allied with the Praetorian Guard and began to prepare the coup. She convinced the commanders that the empire needed a new leader, someone who could restore Rome's dignity. And that figure would be Severus Alexander, the younger, gentler cousin of Elagabalus. An obedient boy, easily molded, everything the emperor was not. When Elagabalus learned of the betrayal, panic consumed him. He tried to flee, to bargain, to appeal to the gods he claimed to serve, but no one listened anymore. His lovers abandoned him, his priests vanished, and even his guards refused to fight. Rome wanted blood, and that blood would come from the palace itself. On a cold morning in March of 222 AD, fate came knocking. The Praetorian Guards stormed the imperial chambers, toppling golden statues and shattering perfumed vases. Elagabalus tried to hide with his mother, Julia Soaemius, inside a chest in the palace basement. But he was found. The scene, according to ancient chronicles, was brutal. The soldiers dragged him by the hair, shouting insults, while the young emperor cried and begged for mercy. Beside him, his mother, the woman who had raised him as a god, tried to protect him, but was killed on the spot. Elagabalus, the boy once worshipped as the sun, was stabbed repeatedly until his body twisted into silence. They say that even in his final moments, he tried to cover his face with his hands, not out of fear but vanity. He did not want to be seen dying disfigured. But death was not enough. Consumed by hatred, the soldiers dragged the emperor's body through the streets of Rome, throwing stones, spitting and laughing. The same people who once applauded him in processions now crowded to witness the end of the golden monster. His body was mutilated, stripped naked, and hung before the crowd as a warning. Then his remains were tied up and thrown into the river Tiber as part of a ritual of purification. Rome wanted to wash its hands, erase the sin, and begin anew. Thus ended the reign of Elagabalus, at only 18 years old, a boy who rose as a god and fell as a curse. An entire empire condemned him but also feared him, because, no matter how much they tried to deny it, he had revealed something Rome had always hidden, that beneath the togas and temples, beneath the laws and glory, burned the same desire that burned within him. Elagabalus was the mirror of a Rome that believed itself immortal, but was as human as he was. After his death, the senators ordered his name erased from all records, his statues destroyed, his temples torn down. It was as if he had never existed. But silence is treacherous. The name Rome tried to bury would echo through the centuries, as a whisper between the sacred and the profane, reminding the world that even the mightiest empire can be consumed by its own excess. Time passed, but the name of Elagabalus was never completely erased. His likeness vanished from monuments, his statues were destroyed, and his name was scratched from official inscriptions, yet history could not forget him. Even shrouded in legend, exaggeration, and contradiction, his presence continues to provoke debate among historians, artists, and philosophers. Who, after all, was Elagabalus? A mad tyrant who plunged Rome into chaos and blasphemy, or a visionary youth born centuries ahead of his time, destroyed by a society unprepared to understand him? The truth is that Elagabalus is one of those figures who defy all labels. While some see him as a symbol of Rome's decadence, others regard him as the first to openly challenge the boundaries of gender, faith, and power. He dared to live as he pleased, love whom he pleased, and worship the God he chose. In an age when individual freedom was a privilege granted to no one, not even an emperor. To Rome, he was a living affront, a cruel mirror reflecting the vices and contradictions of an empire that pretended to be moral but thrived on luxury and violence. Some say Elagabalus was not merely a tyrant, he was a victim. A boy raised to be worshipped as a god, torn from innocence and thrown into a world of intrigue, lust, and loneliness. He never learned to rule men, but only to enchant crowds. He lived surrounded by flatterers, lovers, and hidden enemies. His madness may have been the purest form of solitude, adored by all but loved by none, treated as divine yet dying as a monster. In truth, Elagabalus did not destroy Rome. He merely revealed how deeply it had already rotted from within. In the centuries that followed, his name began to shine again from the shadows. Poets, playwrights, and painters drew inspiration from his tragic and fascinating life. Renaissance writers portrayed him as the symbol of imperial lust, while modern artists reimagined him as an icon of freedom and transgression. In more recent times, his image has been reconsidered through a new lens, that of someone who dared to break boundaries and question the roles of gender and power in a society that rejected difference. Some call him the first rebel of identity, the emperor who tried to be himself, even if it cost him an empire. Elagabalus ceased to be merely a historical figure and became a myth, a dangerous, unsettling, and brilliant myth. History tries to categorize him, but he slips through every definition. He was saint and sinner, king and slave, man and woman, god and child. He lived too fast, burned too bright, and died too young, like all those who dare to defy the world. His legacy is a reminder that greatness and madness are often born of the same flame. Rome tried to extinguish him, but the more time passes, the more his name burns anew across the pages of history, not as an example of power, but as a warning. Those who challenge the world may be forgotten for a time, but never forever. Today, Elagabalus is remembered not only as the cursed emperor, but as a mirror of humanity in its purest form, contradictory, unpredictable, fragile, and magnificent. And perhaps that is why, even 2,000 years later, we still speak of him. Because in every age, there is a bit of Elagabalus, in every soul that seeks freedom, in every voice that defies power, in every person who refuses to become what the world demands them to be. And so ends the story of Elagabalus, the boy who wanted to be a god, the goddess who longed to be loved, and the emperor who dared to challenge eternity itself. His life stands as a cruel and mesmerizing reminder that power without understanding becomes madness, and that freedom without limits can become a prison. He was the reflection of an empire that believed itself immortal, but like him, lived on the edge of the abyss. Rome killed him, but never forgot him. And perhaps that is his true power, to remain alive in the memory of those who tried to erase his name. If you've made it this far, it's because you felt the weight of this story as deeply as I did. So leave your like and subscribe to the channel, not just to support the content, but because every like and every subscription help YouTube understand that this kind of historical and cinematic storytelling deserves to reach more people. When you interact, the algorithm recognizes that the video matters, and that ensures stories like this one, intense, human, and full of truth, don't get lost amid so much superficiality. Tell me in the comments, what impressed you most about Elagabalus? Was it the luxury, the madness, or the loneliness behind the crown? I want to read your thoughts. They give life to this space and help shape the next stories to come. And before you go, don't leave the channel just yet. Click the video appearing on your screen right now, because it's even more fascinating and captivating than this one. A story that will hold you spellbound from beginning to end. Trust me, if you like this one, the next will leave you breathless.